couple minutes, we're going to have our climate advisory group present, and we're going to have our partners help to facilitate. I want to say a little bit about the climate advisory group in Roselawn and Bond Hill. The first one we did here in Cincinnati was in Lower Price Hill. Climate advisory groups are a deep dive into neighborhoods, and they produce what you'll see as the region's first ever climate resiliency plans. And I'm really excited to talk about it. And the key partners are Groundwork, of course, Groundwork Ohio River Valley, who've been presenting, University of Cincinnati Green Umbrella, and the City of Cincinnati's Office of Environmental Sustainability. I do want to give a quick but hearty shout out to Duke Energy, who's helping to fund some projects as it relates to tree planting or other green infrastructure in the neighborhoods that we're doing these programs on. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it to Sophie Revis with Groundwork Ohio River Valley.
All right, thank you so much, Tanner, and thank you so much, Kelsey, for your great presentation. Very informative, and a lot of the things you talked about relate to what we're talking about tonight with the Climate Advisory Group. And I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us tonight for sticking with us and being a part of this movement that we're building. So as Tanner said, I'm Sophie Revis. I'm the Climate Resiliency Director at Groundwork Ohio River Valley. And before I really get into it, I want to encourage everyone to put any comments, perspectives, or experience that they've had in the chat. And also, please put any questions in the chat as we go, and then we'll get to them at the end during our question and answer section. And so, as the Climate Resiliency Director at Groundwork, I am the lead for the Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership. This is a national program which is led by Groundwork USA, and it takes place in 13 cities across the country, from San Diego, California to Yonkers, New York, and of course, in Cincinnati. And so, next slide, please, Tanner. So we know that the climate is changing, and we see it in the news through the droughts and wildfires out west, and we see it in the sea level rise in the east and the unusual amount and intensity of the hurricanes. And that means that climate change looks different across the country. And that's because there's different climates across the country. Similarly, the impacts within a city are different from neighborhood to neighborhood. But even though the climate impacts differ, we are seeing a pattern. And that is that we are finding that communities of color and low-income communities are bearing the brunt of the region's climate impacts. Next slide, please. So one of the climate impacts in the Cincinnati region is extreme heat. And extreme heat feeds into worse air pollution. So the map on the screen shows the temperature of the land in the summer. The red areas are where it's hotter, and the blue areas are where it's cooler. And so the area outlined in black in the top right there are the neighborhoods of Bond Hill and Roselawn. You can see that it's extremely hot throughout those neighborhoods. And in fact, the Blue Island in Bond Hill is actually the country club, which is not accessible for most of the residents in the neighborhood. And so when it comes to climate change, the red areas are going to be even hotter, and then the blue areas will be more protected. Next slide, please, Tanner. So another climate impact is going to be more frequent, intense, and unpredictable storms, which leads to more flooding, sewer backups, and landslides. And in fact, we're already seeing these more intense storms. We saw all last summer. And with this increased water coming into the area and with the heat rising, we're going to have more pests like mosquitoes and ticks, and also more health issues for those with asthma, people who have leaky basements, people with heart issues, and other sensitive populations like our elders and our children. And so this map shows how much stormwater is absorbed into the ground during a rain event. The white shows no absorption, and the dark blue shows a lot of absorption. So Bond Hill and Roselawn in the upper right there don't absorb a lot of rainwater, which can cause more flooding issues, both within the neighborhood and downstream. And so next slide, Tanner. One of the reasons that there are these uneven environmental conditions and uneven climate impacts is the disproportionate distribution of trees and impervious surfaces, which are pavement, blacktop, sidewalks, that sort of thing. And so this map shows the tree canopy coverage and impervious surfaces coverage in Cincinnati. The maps you saw before mirror this, and that's because trees reduce heat and stormwater. They also, impervious surfaces do the exact opposite. They capture heat, especially overnight, so that neighborhoods stay hot even over the evening when it's supposed to cool down. But the impervious surfaces also prevent stormwater from absorbing into the dirt. And the reason that there is uneven tree coverage is the same as the ones that Kelsey mentioned in her presentation. Long-term environmental and social injustices are now causing climate injustices. Next slide, Tanner. And so that was a lot of information, and it's foundational to this Climate Safe Neighborhoods program that is taking place across the country. And so there are a few main goals. And the first is to raise awareness. There are a lot of people who will bear the brunt of these impacts and they don't know. So one of the things we aim to do is to reach those communities with this information. And the second is to work with residents in those communities to be able to self-advocate for more resources to deal with those impacts. Third is to develop and install protective measures with and for these communities. Finally, we aim to impact policies to prioritize equitable and just climate resiliency so that the work we've done in Lower Price Hill, Bond Hill, and Roselawn can reverberate throughout the region. Next slide, please, Tanner. So each city in the Groundwork USA network seeks to complete these goals in different ways. In Cincinnati, we have partnered with Green Umbrella, the City of Cincinnati's Office of Environment and Sustainability, and the UC Department of Psychology to develop a unique approach to achieving these goals, which we call the Climate Advisory Group. And I will now introduce Savannah Sullivan from Green Umbrella to talk more about this.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you everyone for joining. Really excited to be here to talk about this and hear from you. As Sophie mentioned, I'm the climate policy lead at Green Umbrella. And our climate policy work, just a quick rundown on it, is dedicated to working with communities and local governments across our 10-county region in Greater Cincinnati to kickstart and accelerate equitable climate planning and implementation in communities. And so one of the most important parts of this work in cities is community engagement. It can be a really powerful tool for creating better policies, addressing inequality, fostering community support, and just building stronger trust in communities in general. However, sometimes the community engagement we want, the deep community engagement we want to see, can sometimes get compromised, from a local government perspective due to tight budgets or strict timelines. And sometimes in some cases, it can be challenging to create venues to have difficult conversations. But we have a wonderful partnership here that has really enjoyed working together to design and launch the Climate Advisory Group process. And so this got started about a year and a half ago. We came together summer 2020 after the city received a National League of Cities grant to better incorporate equity into the Green Cincinnati Plan, which is the city's playbook for climate action. And our Climate Advisory Group model builds on existing community engagement that has taken place every 5 years when the city does update their Green Cincinnati Plan, but this advisory group process goes deeper and sets a venue to have some of those more difficult conversations, particularly as they relate to, how some communities have been historically underserved and are now experiencing burdens more than other communities and may not receive as many benefits as other communities. Both of those things can be inequitably spread across the city. And so what our climate advisory group does is it basically creates a focus group. You know, what is this thing? It's pretty much a focus group. It brings together residents from historically underserved neighborhoods to not only come together and talk about climate change, but to co-create solutions that are driven by priorities that they see themselves in their neighborhood. And so this model encourages government to involve residents from these communities, elevate their lived experience and their expertise into policy and program making to co-create climate solutions actually with the communities, not just for them, and to center equity across all climate work. And as mentioned earlier, we actually piloted this effort in Lower Price Hill. But this is our second climate advisory group, the Bond Hill Roselawn group. And some of the key outcomes that we have been able to achieve through this climate advisory group process so far is not only elevating residents and leaders within their communities, building their expertise and their voice into city processes, but also creating tools that they can then use to advocate for the solutions they want to see on the ground, which I'll show the resilience map in a bit that the community members made themselves. And importantly, you know, the collaborations and the empowerment to work not only with the city, but with community groups across the region to support this vision that they create through our climate advisory group process. And you know, some of the outcomes that we saw in Lower Price Hill, for example, is participation in the city's community budget request process in order to secure some trees in places that the residents themselves, you know, picked the place for the trees to go. And they're working with Groundwork Ohio River Valley to be able to plant those trees. So Tanner, you can go to the next slide. So these lovely folks here, this is our Bond Hill and Roselawn Climate Advisory Group members. We were so fortunate to be able to work with these folks over the last 6 weeks. They have been the drivers and we have been listening to their experiences and exchanging ideas about how we can improve resilience outcomes in Bond Hill and Roselawn. And we're fortunate to be able to hear from some of them later on in this presentation. But I wanted to explain why we're bringing Bond Hill and Roselawn together into one group. This has to do with how the city has their neighborhood plans. And so when we worked with Lower Price Hill in our pilot program, they have their Lower Price Hill Resurgency Plan, and that is a neighborhood plan that gets connected to the city's planning department. Bond Hill and Roselawn's plan is actually joined. And so we wanted to be able to create a group where leaders from both communities could come together to be able to begin talking about how we could integrate climate and resilience into that neighborhood level plan, which Lower Price Hill was able to do after their climate advisory group. And we're excited to have these leaders here who have come up with great ideas of how to do that with the Bond Hill Roselawn neighborhood level plan. And we have folks who are even appointed to be on Bond Hill and Roselawn leadership positions. You'll hear from one later tonight. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide, Tanner. So we wanted to give a little bit more detail on what happens within the Climate Advisory Group. It's a series of 6 meetings where we dig in on some of the information that Sophie shared out, not only the climate impacts and the maps that Groundwork has been able to develop with data partners, but the history and the history of racial inequality, some of the systemic systems that have kind of embedded the inequalities that we see laying out in some neighborhoods more than others, such as we referenced the redlining map. There are other processes that we explore in that first meeting that is connected to something called urban renewal, and a variety of other policies and practices that have occurred over the last many decades that have entrenched some of these inequalities. And so we have conversations and hear from residents themselves about their experiences and familiarity with some of these outcomes. And then we flow into talking about the intersection of those two things. How do climate justice and racial justice, how do they connect? And the injustices in both of those categories, as we unearth in our conversations, they share the same roots. And so we kind of co-create a story of how racial justice action and climate justice action must be taken in lockstep together, and how when we create climate change adaptation solutions, which we then talk about in our third meeting, we're able to have the conversations, some of those difficult conversations that maybe previous community engagement venues couldn't provide. We're able to blend them in our meetings here. And so we then move into some work meetings where we talk about what is happening here locally already, what are maybe some of the gaps of what's not happening here locally at the neighborhood level as well as at the city level. And then we get to the fun stuff where we are creating actual maps to better understand the residents in the climate advisory group, their experience with climate impacts and where exactly are they experiencing those impacts, as well as where do they want to see solutions. And when I say where, we are talking at sort of the block level. Folks are identifying where they want to see trees planted and more. And this is a very democratized process where we had votes at every step of the way to ensure that the direction of these meetings is really being led by the residents who are participating in the meetings. And it leads to our final meeting, which we're having now, which is a listening session and a community showcase to be able to talk about what we achieved here. And a really important part of this work is that our values is that, this is work, and we were able to compensate all of our resident advisors in the advisory group. This was a paid position because they were dedicating their time and their expertise into this process. And we did have tasks to further connect into the community. So collecting neighborhood surveys to understand how their neighbors are also experiencing climate change, conducting climate impact and adaptation mapping, which we'll show on the next slide. Oh, just kidding. I'm going to talk about this slide first. We first wanted to highlight just some of the benefits that we heard from some of our residents that are connected to a number of the resilience strategies. And these resilience strategies can provide not only physical benefits, such as reducing the temperature for when a neighborhood might be experiencing extreme heat, or protecting them from flooding, but there are also dramatic health impacts, both to our physical health in terms of air quality, as well as mental health, as well as economic impacts. It can help save energy as we create more manageable temperatures alongside folks' residences, and can improve property values. All right, next slide. So one of the key outputs from this climate advisory group is a climate resilience plan. And this is created by the residents themselves. And so this map here, what you see is a collection of different strategies that the residents wanted to see happen in their community and where. So you can see the green and orange striped areas. That is where the residents in the advisory group had identified green spaces and community gardens as being a great opportunity, and marked along streetways where trees are needed, where bus stops are needed, where green roofs, which is a green roof, for anyone unfamiliar, is a layer of vegetation planted over a waterproofing system that's installed on a flat or just a slightly sloped roof. Similarly, a green parking lot is a surface strategy where you can incorporate permeable or semi-permeable paving and porous design techniques to help reduce stormwater. And this is Bond Hill's plan. We can go to our next slide. This is Roselawn's plan. And so this is one of the tools that we were talking about, that not only is this a map that can be leveraged when working with the city to identify how to improve resilience, but it can be used in working with community groups or working with fellow neighbors. It's a tool now in their hands to be incorporated into the neighborhood plan or in any effort that they seek to pursue. Next slide. And so now we're going to do a quick poll because, as you know, this is a listening session, but we want to hear from everyone on the line what they think are some top priorities from their perspective in terms of these resilient strategies I just mentioned. So Tanner, you can go ahead and launch the poll. We'll give it just a minute or two. We've got a lot of folks on the line, so we want to make sure we can get as many responses as possible. We'll give it another 30 seconds. All right, thank you, everyone. We're going to end it and share it so you can see. Looks like we've got about 30% of folks on the line are Bond Hill or Roselawn residents. So it's great. I hope we hope to hear from you about your thoughts on the maps and everything you're hearing here tonight. And for everyone else on the line, the other 70%, we're so excited to share these outcomes with you and hopefully connect with you in the future about working in this way in your neighborhood. But we also can see here really interesting outlay of what are the adaptation priorities of folks on the line. And looks like green space, street trees, and community food gardens take the cake, which is really exciting. And you're going to hear a bit more about that actually from Ollie Kroner from the city of Cincinnati, just a bit more about some of these initiatives themselves and what was heard from our climate advisory group about these topics. But we can go ahead to the next slide, Tanner. So now we wanted to hear from our climate advisory group members themselves. On the slides here, we've included some quotes, written quotes from some folks, but I first want to invite Daniel and to unmute and come online and share in his own words why he got involved with the climate advisory group. And Daniel, if you can just share which neighborhood you live in and why you decided to join the climate advisory group.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel Hill. I live in Bond Hill. The reason why I decided to join the climate advisory group was really for the knowledge. I lived here for almost 9 years now, and I really didn't know much about the problems facing Bond Hill and Bond Hill and as well as Roselawn and the people living there. I didn't really know about that. And as well, since I'm a senior right now, and I'm probably going to be leaving Bond Hill in about maybe half a year, I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to learn more about the problems that the people are facing here, as well as not just the problems, but also to learn about the ways to counteract and prevent these problems from happening. And I just hope that my small little part in this group will be able to benefit the people benefit Roselawn and Bond Hill, as well as the lives of the people who live here. So I hope that in the future, maybe in the future, like 10 years or so, that when I come here, when I visit back here, I'll be able to see the Roselawn as well as Bond Hill going from one of the lowest, maybe something like the lowest tree canopy to maybe one of the highest, or maybe not the highest, but not being the lowest anymore. So I hope something like that will be able to happen. So these are one of the reasons why I decided to join this group.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. And I also want to give a shout out to Daniel. He is also one of the green team members at Groundwork Ohio River Valley. And he uses his own 2 hands to do a lot of the tree planting and garden building across the city. So thank you, Daniel, for not only your participation in the climate advisory group, but the work you do. All right, I'd next like to invite Melisha to come online. And Melisha, if you can just share your neighborhood and why you wanted to join the climate advisory group.
Thank you, Savannah, I'm sorry. Good evening, my name is Melisha Reese. I'm a proud veteran, a proud graduate of Purcell Marion High School, a proud graduate of the University of Dayton, and a proud homeowner in Bond Hill as of a year ago. And even more proud that my family has been living in Bond Hill for the last 28 years. I just returned home about 1.5 years ago, eager to pour into my community the way that I feel that my community has poured and invested into me. Growing up, I would see, everybody, pure everyday people getting up, going to work every day, city workers, county workers, state workers, entrepreneurs, blue collar workers, coming home, taking care of their yards, their lawns, gardening outside, and being active, going to vote. And I just thought that, and they just knew what was going on there in terms of what was going on in their community. And to this day, I'm still reminded of how active the people were from the signage. You'll see neighborhood watch signage all around Bond Hill still. And it's just constant signs of how active this community used to be. So when I came home, I decided to join the Bond Hill Community Council, obtain the position of safety chair, and I felt very fulfilled in my short time as the safety chair there. Unfortunately, my father's health declined and I had to step down from that position. but I still wanted to be involved in the community in just in a lesser capacity. So a friend of mine, Margot, actually told me about this opportunity, and I couldn't pass it up. It was a way for me to still be involved, just not as involved with such a big role in the community. And I've learned so much about climate change. I'm, very happy to have met everyone that I've in this group, and I'm still dedicated to bringing Bond Hill back and making it better.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melisha. And I want to give a shout out to Melisha, who coined a new term that I love. And folks on the line may be familiar with the term food desert. When your community might not have a place to access fresh, healthy produce and other food. Melisha coined the term entertainment desert, and that was something we talked about quite a bit in our climate advisory group. But one element of building resilience is social connection. And if our neighborhoods don't have places for entertainment and coming together, that makes it a bit of an entertainment desert. So thank you for your creativity, Melisha. All right, Tanner, we're gonna go to our next slide. And so I'd now like to invite Margot online, who Melisha actually just referenced, to share a bit about the climate impact mapping that was done, as well as another output from the climate advisory group, which is all residents work together to create a resilience statement. So Margot, if you can share what neighborhood you're from and then take it away.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Margot, and I have lived in Bond Hill for 14 years. I am the CEO and founder of On-the-Go Enrichment, which covers education for early childhood and elementary education, epilepsy awareness, and community ambassadorship. I am extremely vested within Bond Hill. Excited to share as well, we are still celebrating our 150th year anniversary for being established as a neighborhood. So it's been great to be able to do a partnership not only with Bond Hill, but with Roselawn, since we are so intertwined with each other. I guess, well, there are some pieces about history, but I know we're going to touch into that a little bit later. So as far as going into our maps and the reason why climate change is just such a major intricate part of what we need to do as far as helping out with making better decisions with how we access our neighborhoods. So we talked a little bit about, why do we have to think about climate change? And one of the key points that I think about as we talk about food deserts is that when you look at some of our numbers, when we were working together, there was some information that was given to us. It's just some statistics. And the statistics show that there's a 23% poverty rate within our neighborhoods. So it's quite interesting to see how that affects with climate change. And so we find that not only are that, but just the difference for resources and environmental issues. So the intensified droughts and impacts on crops, all of those things go back into like affecting our communities. We also, as we continue to work together, I thought that there was another great word that was used when it talks about, we always think about health, but health branches out to so many other pieces. So thinking about our air quality and how air quality goes into other health issues, which can bring, when we talk about climate change, the premature deaths, salmonella infections, gastrointestinal outbreaks. But one other thing that I think that we just as a community don't always touch on is mental health. So what you find, especially with these climate issues, is that you'll also see that it affects people mentally. So not only mentally, behaviorally. And there was a word when we talk about coined words that was used was the eco anxiety. So how the environment affects us. So it was very interesting after we were given the opportunity to see a lot of the slides as far as the maps that were talked about land surface and key vulnerability, that we were given an opportunity to participate in these two maps that you're seeing right now, which is the community climate map. So basically seeing some of the things that are affecting what are going on. So we have noise pollution. Are there areas where there's more heat land, heat islands? One thing that I thought was quite interesting was you were talking about the impervious lands or surfaces, which is quite interesting just because it's about how these surfaces really create and steam up pollution. So being a part of that, trying to find out where there were illegal dumping areas. So taking the opportunity as a resident to do almost like a seek and find of what really affects us. And from there, we actually worked, I don't know if we have another slide about that, but after really working on the community climate map, then we were also challenged, which I found to be something that was looking at the community quite different about adaptations and what we could do to make sure that not only were we asking for solutions, but being a part of that solution. So I thought that that was really interesting, just seeing how we can do a major change with our community with being extremely involved. And as we were talking about being involved, we also created together a resilience statement. And if we can go to that fancy slide. And this resilience statement was created through all of our team and really putting together not only our emotions, but what the drive and just what we found that was important to both our communities. And what it states is that the resilience statement reads as residents of Bond Hill and Roselawn, the Climate Advisory Group is determined to build resilience into the fiber of our neighborhoods by uniting residents with public and private entities in order to design and implement creative solutions. We will contribute to the greater good for those who will come after us and who are disproportionately affected by climate change. Through accountability and neighborhood pride, we envision a sustainable and a just climate future for all Bond Hill and Roselawn. So throughout this whole climate advisory group, it's been our dedication, especially with working within the 6 weeks of giving a lot of thought and really showing that we do care about our neighborhoods and want to be the models of it, but also incorporate anyone else, which hopefully will be all of our community into the next step.
Great, thank you so much, Margot.
Yeah, thank you so much, Margot. Next, Tanner, we can go to the next slide. I would like to introduce Kaylee, who's a student at Woodward High School, to talk about some of the key takeaways that she had from this climate advisory group meeting course. So go ahead, Kaylee.
Hi, I was actually supposed to be talking about pollution in food instead of the key takeaways. Is that a part of it?
Yeah, that's a part of this.
Okay, I'm sorry. So, hey everyone, I'm Kaylee. I'm a junior at Woodward Career Tech, and I'm representing on behalf of Roselawn, being a resident of 2 years. Along with this program, I'm involved in student ambassadors, a part of the Nevertheless Job and Career Readiness Program. I'm captain of Girls to Women and more. So today I wanted to talk to you guys about pollution in food and my ideas on what can be done to solve these issues. Over the past few weeks, exploring both Bond Hill and Roselawn, the major thing that I noticed was the fact that there was like trash everywhere. And I feel like it's so easy for someone to just throw something on the ground rather than just throwing it away. So I think that's a big problem that can lead to even bigger issues. And as you guys may or may not know, pollution can bring about global warming, infertile land, climate change, and more. So some small steps that I think that we can take to prevent these things would be to put out informative signs that are appealing and attractable, that will reinforce, as well as educating people on reducing, recycling, and reusing, putting out more trash cans and making them more available to the ones that may be waiting around for a bus or more. The last idea that I had to do with seeing how areas when coming off the highway of Paddock and Seymour can be the most polluted areas due to the homeless staying in the area. So I think building a shelter for those people will not only be beneficial to pollution, but to them as well. Moving on to food, if you live in the Bond Hill, Roselawn area, you'll notice that traveling distance to get to like grocery stores or even fresh produce is like a longer, it's just like a long drive to get there. So one of the speakers that we had in the past few weeks spoke about his job of bringing fresh produce to communities, which is exactly what I think that we need here. And you guys may or may not be familiar with the old and abandoned Carousel Inn and Suites, as well as the Carousel Shop Center on Reddick Road. But I think that would be the perfect place for rebuilding a fresh market, and it would be more feasible to the residents of Roselawn or of the neighborhood. And not only will this help the residents, but it'll also limit the amount of air pollution because it'll be less of a drive.
Awesome. Thank you, Kaylee. I really find your plans and the things that you want to do extremely inspiring, and I hope that we can work together to make some of those things happen. Now I would like to introduce Phil Waller, who has recently been appointed as the Bond Hill Community Council Beautification Chair to talk about the next steps and the future of the Climate Advisory Group. So Tanner, can you go to the next slide? And whenever you're ready, Phil, take it away.
Hey folks, Phil Waller. Grew up in Bond Hill. My family's lived here for the past 41 years. And like young Daniel, who said he'll be leaving us after high school in a few months, I left when I was 18 and finally came back after a long career in community and economic development. I've worked in a bunch of different cities, both in the US and the Caribbean, but the events of 2020 inspired me to come back home and do this work here. So I'm really invested in Bond Hill. And right now I'm studying sustainable agriculture at Cincinnati State, and I'm working to start a farm business next year. But also as my new role as beautification chair at the Bond Hill Community Council, I'm really interested in working with the council to leverage the resources we have there to work with our neighbors and city agencies to directly address some of the challenges and issues we've talked about tonight. And all three things that folks that sort of rose to the top of the poll today are the things I'm interested in doing: planting trees, developing green spaces, and of course, community gardens. So I'm excited to see that energy. And so just to do a quick recap here, closer to the beginning of the presentation, we talked about the sort of key issue areas that are affecting climate change, are affecting the climate here in Bond Hill and Roselawn. And so these are green space, or the lack of green spaces and trees, housing and gentrification, sustainable development, flooding, energy, and transportation. But if we go to the next slide, we also spend a lot of time, not only educating ourselves on what the issues are, but also on what the potential solutions could be. And so Savannah, when she presented, she explained what some of these different project-based solutions might be. So again, planting street trees, rain gardens, green space, community gardens, green roofs, green parking lots, asphalt ceiling, and creating cooling bus stops. And so last week when we sort of voted on these 8 items, like we all did tonight, our smaller group voted on these. The 3 that came to the top for us, which should be on the next slide, were street trees, green spaces, and cooling bus stops. So the first 2 seem to be a consistent theme. I'm all about community gardens. I love seeing that, but I think there's some interest too in creating some bus stops that can help lower the temperatures and create a more comfortable experience for folks while they're waiting to figure out how to get to where they're going. And so moving forward with CAG, with this working group or this focus group that we've established, over the past 6 weeks, we've met on this weekly basis, and it's been sort of more of an intensive educational, discussion group. But moving forward in 2022, we'll begin meeting on a monthly basis with the intention of actually bringing some of these projects to life. And so I understand that Groundwork and Greenbrella has already identified some resources to help get us going with street trees and green spaces, perhaps. But we want to continue to have opportunities like this discussion tonight, so that whatever work we end up doing continues to be informed, and I hope participated with our neighbors in Bond Hill and Roselawn. So stay tuned for more details about what's coming for next year.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Phil. I'm really excited to keep working with everyone in the new year and making these come to life, like you said. So I think before we move into the Q&A, Tanner, did you have something that you wanted to announce?
Not to put her on the spot, but I think this is her job at this point. We just had a very special guest join, City of Cincinnati Council Member elect Mika Owens. And if I could put her on the spot for a while, if she has speaking availability, I think she would appreciate introducing herself, maybe interrupting us for just a minute, because there's some interesting stuff she'll probably want to hear from our group after this in just the next couple slides before we end. But she might also have some relevant information to share. So Mika, if you are there, please go ahead.
Oh my goodness, I am so honored to be amongst all of you activists and experts and advocates. Mika Owens, council member elect from Cincinnati, Ohio. Really excited to be with you because I was just appointed to the Climate, Environment, and Infrastructure Committee to chair that. And so this means a new day for Cincinnati. And, it also means a new day for Ohio as we continue to collaborate across the state. And so, we get to build a future that is green, that is sustainable, that is about jobs, that is about growth, that is about doing the innovative things that we've all probably had top of mind, but now it's the time to do it. Like, it's the time to take the brakes off of our thinking and making sure that we're moving Ohio, moving Cincinnati into a more sustainable future. So I am just inspired every time I am on a call or connected with people who care about the future in this way. And so I am excited to be able to lead Cincinnati, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Mika. It's really special to have you join us, and we're all very excited about January when you come on board with the city. So I'll pass it back to Sophie Revis with Groundwork, but thank you so much again for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Mika, and thank you, Tanner. Before we jump into the Q&A, I wanted to welcome Ollie from the City of Cincinnati's Office of Environment Sustainability, who's been a key partner in all of these meetings, and talk about, some of the takeaways that he heard.
Thank you, Sophie. Great to have you here, Councilwoman Owens. Very excited for that burst of energy and the newly formed committee, because we have a lot of momentum building here and a lot of work to do. And that's why we're here tonight. I am Ollie Kroner, Sustainability Manager for the City of Cincinnati. I'm joined by Ellery and Jordan, also from our office, and I noticed that we have a number of other city departments here on the line, Parks, Budget Office, Planning, among others. So thank you all for tuning in tonight. As you've heard, you have a number of climate change experts on the line tonight, people with expertise on the global issues, the national issues, the regional issues. But nobody knows what climate change looks like in your neighborhood as well as you do. So this is really an effort, as Savannah outlined, to co-create climate solutions on the ground in Bond Hill and Roselawn. And so over these last 6 weeks, we've been talking about some of the challenges we're facing and some of the things we're doing about it. And to recap, our Office of Environment Sustainability is focused on climate change, how it will impact city government, how it will impact neighborhoods and quality of life for residents, and then what we're going to do about it. And that body of work takes shape in our Green Cincinnati plan. So all of this input you're providing, all of these relationships we're building is many small steps towards what will be a future Green Cincinnati plan. So last week we met and we gave you 3 prompts. We asked you, moving forward, what's the best way to engage with you and your community? We asked you, considering the local impacts of climate change that we've been discussing, who do you see as the most vulnerable within your community? And number 3, given all of that, what are the key actions that you would recommend moving forward? And I promised we would distill some of those themes that we heard and come back to you. And so here we are again tonight. So next slide, please. So we asked how to engage with you. Here's what we heard. We heard that we needed to be in the community, at community centers, hosting events. It can't all be virtual. It can't all be at City Hall. We heard that posters and flyers in the community are a great way to bring awareness to topics. We were warned not to use too much text, bring the images to help communicate the topics at hand. We were encouraged to look at advertising on radio stations and on buses, things that would get eyes and ears within the community. Didn't hear a whole lot about social media, which is different than what we've heard from other communities, but that's conspicuously absent. And then we also heard that we should engage with community ambassadors, because nobody listens to each other more than neighbors. And really that's what we're building and cultivating here. You are becoming community ambassadors for climate change and activating your neighborhood. When we asked who is most vulnerable, we heard a theme around people experiencing transitions, whether those are young kids in their physical development, teens processing through high school into their next stages, like we heard from Daniel, or elderly who are undergoing life changes. And then also people with asthma or allergies subject to air quality issues. Then when we got into specific climate recommendations, and we just heard a number of these from Phil, focus on increasing tree canopy and green spaces. I know urban forestry is very aggressive about the street tree program. They're on the line tonight. They're hearing you loud and clear. We heard a call to utilize vacant lots, identify who those owners are, why they're vacant, how they can be activated, but then also maintain them. You know, sometimes programs are launched, they're celebrated, and then they're walked away from. And we need to have a concerted effort to stay engaged and maintain them. Oh, we heard a lot about bus shelters, both the frequency of bus stops, but improving the bus stops with benches and shelters to protect from the elements. Conversation around development of community benefits agreements. So for future developments, how can the community best position to collectively benefit and guide those developments? Conversation around forming a land trust to promote affordable housing options, also home ownership options. As we know, as we've discussed on multiple occasions through this series, affordable housing is closely tied to climate resilience in many different ways. And then to continue to bring these impacts of climate change to the forefront, bring them to our elected and incoming council members, keep this top of mind moving forward. Next slide, please. And to reiterate, the Green Cincinnati Plan is really intended to be a citywide community vision for the sustainable, equitable, resilient future that we want for our city. And there are many different contributing factors, many different threads that will give shape to what will be the Green Cincinnati Plan's next iteration. You can see here, we will have a steering committee of institutional figureheads from around the city. We'll have subject matter experts focused on food and waste and energy and transportation systems. Green Umbrella is working with us to collect climate equity efforts and policies from around the country that we'll consider. In this effort, climate safe neighborhoods, both the climate advisory group here, also Price Hill, and future iterations in other neighborhoods are all giving shape to different themes of this work. We've partnered with the University of Cincinnati as well. I think Carly Trott's lab is on here. They helped develop a collection of climate equity indicators that gives us a data set to model from to begin to shape the plan. And then of course, broad community input. last time we developed this plan, we collected over 1,400 recommendations that we had to synthesize and distill down to 80 recommendations that were ultimately adopted by City Council in the current Green Cincinnati plan. So this is intended to be an ongoing conversation. Want to show you that we are hearing the themes here, that we are making good on including them in our planning efforts, and that you will see your fingerprints on the future body of work here. And with that, I wanted to share one side story, building off of the entertainment district, the entertainment desert concept and the need for social connectivity. Maybe some of you all, probably many of you are not old enough to remember the heat wave in Chicago in the 90s, but some of you might. It was one of the most catastrophic climate emergencies the US has faced. More than 700 deaths recorded when temperatures hit 120 degrees and stayed there for more than a week. And Harvard put together a big analysis to retrospectively take a look at that and try to help understand who died and why and who didn't. And there were some base assumptions that they began to experiment with. Is it poverty that was really the driver here? Is it minority populations, households without air conditioning, elderly? They tested all of these variables and were surprised to learn that the lowest income communities of color were actually the lowest mortality rates, or the top 3 communities with lowest mortality rates. And one of the key findings of that report, you can find this if you look it up, is the concept of social cohesion. That when neighbors know each other and are well connected and can call on each other for help, can look out for each other, check on each other, can come together and take action in the face of crisis, that is the #1 contributing factor to resilience. So I'd like to think that all of this work, while we are building some real tangible outcomes, real products to work towards, we are also developing social cohesion within our communities. Would welcome any feedback on the themes we did identify here, but like I said, this is really intended to be ongoing. We hope to keep you engaged as we take our next steps.
Great, thank you so much, Ollie. It's really awesome to see the feedback you all got and synthesized. And on that note, if any of the folks from Bond Hill and Roselawn on the line have anything they would like to add to that, feel free to add it in the chat, and it'll be collected and added. And at this time, I would like to encourage anyone, if they have any questions, to throw them in the chat and we will answer them. So here is a question for Daniel. So, as a teenager, someone who's just about to graduate high school, how did you feel about working on this climate advisory group with adults?
Well, at first, I definitely felt, kind of like a little bit intimidated because everybody else was kind of like an adult. And they all had these different experiences that they've done and they've had as well. And I didn't really have as much experience or knowledge as everybody else. So I was kind of like down a bit for that. But I kind of switched that around, like, because I'm here to learn. I'm here to gain the knowledge like everybody else is about these problems. As these problems as well. So it was a good experience to just be able to learn all these things with everybody else, and just to be able to maybe take away this in the future to other places that I may be living. So I think it was a really good experience.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Kaylee, would you like to take a stab at answering the same question?
Mine's is kind of around like what Daniel said. I've only been here in Roselawn for 2 years, and honestly, I didn't know really much about my community at all. I'm not really like involved with even my neighbors. So it was just like I didn't really know what to expect from this program. And I just didn't know anything much about like the topics that we were talking about. So it was kind of intimidating. But I think I don't give myself enough credit a lot of the times, and I always overthink everything. So I gained a lot, and there are things that I would like, to do in Bond Hill, Roselawn now that I'm involved. And yeah.
Great, thank you both so much. It's so great to have young voices on the group. This is your future too, and your perspectives are just as important. And so there's a question in the chat from Roger. When these infrastructure ideas are made, how will they be maintained? Tanner shared in the chat that Groundwork's Youth Force program does a lot of that work, but it will take buy-in from the government, volunteers, businesses, and more. Ollie, would you mind answering that question from a government perspective?
That's a big question. I think government is working on this topic from a number of different angles. We just wrapped up the United Nations Conference of Parties, which was the international climate change convention, and they put forward some concrete steps to work towards solutions internationally. You saw at the federal level, big infrastructure bill passed, and a lot of spending on climate solutions and infrastructure improvements. You hear tonight actions at the local level, but I do think we are seeing more and more leadership from the private sector. I'll highlight the 2030 district here in Cincinnati, which is a coalition of for-profit entities. There are nonprofits included as well, but major corporations, if you think about Kroger and Procter & Gamble and Fifth Third, coming together to collectively commit to a 50% reduction in energy consumption, water consumption, and emissions from transportation by 2030. And that's entirely voluntary. There's no regulation behind that. So, I think there's some, call it market pressure from the people, and businesses are responding to that. You can see that in a lot of the ESG reporting, where different companies are putting forward their own sustainability strategies absent of regulatory guidance.
Awesome, thank you. Another question for Kaylee and Daniel. Have you both shared being involved in these meetings with your friends and family? And if so, what has been their feedback?
Actually, I wouldn't say with my family, but at school, my teacher, she's actually on here right now, but Dr. Hawkins High, she sent out an email to all the staff about me being a part of the program, and everyone was congratulating me and giving me pointers as far as like my science teacher. She gave me like some of the stuff that we were already learning in class as far as environmental science and stuff like that. So they were very encouraging and positive.
For me, it would be on my family side. It would definitely be a lot of them were definitely surprised when told of like some of the information we learned, kind of like how the Bond Hill and Roselawn being like the lowest tree canopies in Cincinnati. That was definitely surprising, because I guess kind of you live here for so long, you don't tend to think about it as much. So it was definitely surprising for them to learn about some of these things. But on my friends' side, not a whole lot, because a lot of my friends unfortunately live outside of the Cincinnati area, so I haven't been as involved with them. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. It's great to hear that you're spreading this information around to your family and your community members. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to build here is more community ambassadors. So thank you. And this question is for Margot. So how do you think that your organization can utilize resources and information from the CAG?
Oh, well, that puts me on the spot, doesn't it? Well, with on-the-go enrichment community ambassador, so we really focus on, one of my major platforms is litter control. And so some of the basically like our cleanup initiative has been focused on just trying to maintain beautification and also just being able to create that neighborhood pride. So I think being able to intertwine not only the initiative for beautification, but also seeing some of the ways that that beautification can look, what that can look like. So for example, we have memorial pots out for people that have been, if they've had, for them to be more, for them to have a memorial for just the whole sense of how they passed in the neighborhood. So having more ways to do something in a positive light. So instead of moving forward with like balloons and other ways that are commemorated for people to be recognized, or finding an eco-friendly way. I think that any type of funding and think tank of moving forward, if we've had the opportunity to utilize funds, really goes about the needs of the community as well. So I think that, you know, honestly, just even be thrown that question pretty much puts me in a place of saying, wow, it's an honor to even be thought about as something or an organization that would be able to help with this. So I guess it would take just more, I'd like to have more input from the neighborhood, honestly, because it's not just a one person effort. And I would love for those funds to be, you know, spaced out and to be able to help with opportunities within the organization, but also how it can really showcase our neighborhoods too.
Yeah,
Thank
awesome.
you for asking me. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you for answering. So here is another question. What is next for the Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership outside of Lower Price Hill and Bond Hill and Roselawn? Tanner, would you mind taking a stab at that? And then Savannah as well?
Sure, also put on the spot. Well, I think one of the great things about tonight is that you see all the partnerships that are here. Not only do we have Council Member-elect Mika Owens, but you have the city representing Green Umbrella UC. So we've got some real legs here. We've got a model that we've established that is far different than any other engagement around climate change planning that has ever happened. That means it's really exciting, but that means it's also kind of unknown. What Groundwork tries to do when we do community engagement initiatives like this is do a little pre-planning. We try to fundraise and have money there for projects afterwards that communities want to see. We try to employ local residents and especially youth. And so what I would love to see is we have 52 neighborhoods is a process like this in 52 neighborhoods. Maybe it's not exactly like this. Maybe some of the neighborhoods have a train the trainee component. Maybe some of them, like all the amazing CAG members here, are actually employed as coordinators in some way or another, full-time or part-time, to take on projects that are funded by Groundwork, the city, Green Umbrella, whatever it may be. But a lot of that is yet to be determined. I think the one thing that we do absolutely need is somewhat of a concentrated voice to City Hall, to the county, whatever governments we're dealing with as we look regional as well, so that these efforts and everything that we're capturing here can actually go towards a policy change. Because when we look at these resiliency maps, they're awesome, right? But do I think they're going to be like 100 green roofs in Lower Price Hill or Bond Hill anytime in the next few years? Probably not. But those things and those requests can inform something like the Green Cincinnati plan that Ollie orchestrates. So that was a long-winded answer for more organization, more funding, and I think we have some ideas on how to do that because of the amazing participation through these CAGs. I'll pass it to Savannah.
Great, thank you, Tanner. Yeah, and I'll build on that and kind of speak to this effort and how we're trying to integrate it into regional activities as well. So as mentioned, at Greenerville, we have a climate policy body of work that launched about a year ago. And so not only is part of that partnering with Groundwork on this awesome community engagement work here, but as well, we are working to launch something called a regional climate collaborative, which is basically a network for public agencies to better understand regional climate impacts on their communities and advance these types of strategies. And so this will basically facilitate peer sharing, highlight best practices, and develop opportunities for regional collaboration. And this will be the participation of different cities and counties and their governments and their residents, similar to, kind of the mix of folks that we have here. But what this collaborative seeks to do is to build kind of a regional vision. So we have the Green Cincinnati Plan, which serves Cincinnati's sustainability action. But we're trying to work with local governments across our region because a lot of these issues don't know political boundaries. The flooding that happens in an adjacent jurisdiction can very well affect Cincinnati and vice versa. And so we are working to begin having those conversations together and, importantly, integrate climate safe into that type of regional conversation, not only from the perspective of building that narrative of how historical practices that have propped up racial segregation and other elements of systemic racism have influenced the outlay of climate impacts, but how we can also work collaboratively together to build solutions, and through that leverage our climate advisory group process. And so we hope to begin similar, like Tanner just said, we're kind of in the planning and building stages for being able to expand this work, but we hope to also bring it to cities outside of Cincinnati, in Southwest Ohio, Northern Kentucky, Southeast Indiana, as we're able to in the coming years, so that this can become a regional movement as well.
Awesome. Thank you both. I'm really excited to see this grow. And the next question here is for Phil. You mentioned that you are at the university, the Cincinnati State University for Urban Agriculture. And the question is, what do you see as the intersection between urban agriculture and climate change?
Well, so for one, I think as climate is changing, we live in a Midwest region and there's certain crops that grow here, and the Midwest grows a lot of the crops for this country. Although we also, so much of our food these days also is grown from elsewhere. I think as we're seeing our supply chain be challenged, like we're seeing now with issues related to COVID, and we're seeing the climate heating up, food insecurity is going to become a huge issue. If we're not able to ship our food and it's too hot to grow our own food, what will happen? And so I think your question was, what's the intersection between agriculture and climate change? That's one thing that I see. I'll leave it there.
Gotcha. Thank you. And so we have time for one more question. And this question is, for community members working on this in various ways, do projects like these provide a greater sense of ownership within your community? And if so, what was effective in getting you involved that may work with others in the community? Melisha, would you want to take a stab at that?
Well, I can give an example of when I used to come home from the service. I already kind of felt a sense of pride about Bond Hill, but it seemed like every Saturday I would come home, I always see actually Marge on the corner with her program, with her organization on the Go Richmond, cleaning up every Saturday. So I saw her probably about maybe 5-6 years ago, and I would just not hit her up, but every time I came home, I would coincidentally start and volunteer with their program or whatever. And that just gave me a greater sense of initiative to get involved even more when I got back home, that I saw someone else doing it. And I felt a sense of responsibility as well to get involved and invest in my community as well. So I do think that, you know, it's on us to make it happen, and it's on us to bring our peers in here. But you know, that's you know, we want change, but there's a sense of accountability that we have to take responsibility for. We need to be proactive in getting our community back. So that's what sparked me.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that's well said. And I want to hear, you know, an answer from about the same question from Phil, if that's all right. So the question is, for community members working on this in various ways, do projects like these provide a greater sense of ownership in your community?
Yeah, I think if residents, if we can be the ones who are leading those projects as much as possible, which means getting support and funding those projects, then absolutely, I feel like it helps us to take ownership. It's one thing to be worried about what's happening to us or to complain about what's happening to us. And it's a whole other thing to be able to work together to solve the issues. And we heard earlier about the benefits of social cohesion. Nothing brings a community better together, in my opinion, than actually doing things together. So yeah.
So do you think something that might be effective in getting people motivated around this is like some sort of event or celebration even? Yeah,
Since the spotlight's on me, I might throw it back on Melisha, because she and I have had a great conversation recently about ways, you know, she coined this term entertainment desert, which I hope becomes like official policy lingo now. But it's so true. Just having more events, and I know that's challenging with the pandemic, which is ongoing, and it's really hurt social cohesion in our neighborhoods. But you know, I think it's one level of engagement to break bread with each other and celebrate and be together, and I think it's another level of engagement to put our heads together and come up with ideas and actually create the future ourselves. We can make the future rather than let it happen to us.
I'll just add that you know, social interaction is very important in building a community. I feel that you know, Bond Hill, in order to live in Bond Hill right now, you have to you can live here, but you have to do everything else everywhere else. And I don't think that's the way that we're gonna bring our community together, is having to outsource. Everything's outsourced in our community. So I'm very vocal about like doing something as simple as a skating rink here. You know, there's no skating rinks in Cincinnati anymore. Something just to bring people in, you know, just to bring people in. And I know that's probably far-fetched, but just something to get people in and moving around and talking with each other, because we don't have many, you know, people of all ages. We don't have that here in Bond Hill. And I'm gonna speak for Roselawn as well too. I could be wrong, but I just think it's so important to be able to fellowship with one another in your own community. That's how you build unity. That's how you start looking out for each other. And you know, I'm very big on that. I was pretty much raised on that. So
I know we're at time. I think it's important just to quickly build on the point that Melisha mentioned about outsourcing. One stat that came up in our discussions in this group is the number of people who commute to Bond Hill and Roselawn to work, the number of people who leave Bond Hill and Roselawn to work. And so if you see a Venn diagram of who's living and working here, like almost nobody does both. So everyone, like in some ways, Bond Hill and Roselawn are transient communities, on top of being a food desert and on top of being an entertainment desert. So if we can start to grow our own food and have our own entertainment, that's to me the foundation for creating our own economy that's led by us and for us. And that's resilience.
that's also FUBU.
Yes, thank you both. What a wonderful note to end on. It really does take like a strong entertainment network, social cohesion, food, everything to make a truly climate resilient neighborhood. And so with that, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight to our final meeting for the Bond Hill and Roselawn Climate Advisory Group. If you would like to be involved with this, feel free to email me and we can talk about how everyone can join the Climate Advisory Group in the future. So again, thank you all and have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.